There are sins too monstrous to confess. Affairs too twisted to forgive. And secrets so dark, they demand blood to stay buried. One family. Burned alive in their own home. A tragic accident, at least, that's what the world believed. But fire has a way of cleansing everything, except the truth. And when investigators dug through the ashes, they uncovered something far worse than a simple tragedy. A forbidden affair. A pregnancy that should have never happened. And a man so desperate to keep his double life hidden that he erased his own bloodline in the most brutal way imaginable. But no matter how carefully you plan the perfect crime, the devil is always in the details. And this time, the devil was a man of God. Some betrayals shake a family. Others destroy it completely. When a secret is too shameful to admit, how far will someone go to make sure no one ever finds out? And when the man behind it all claims to be a messenger of God, how do you even begin to understand such evil? Welcome to Everyday True Crime, where we uncover the darkest, most disturbing cases that prove real life is more terrifying than fiction. If you love shocking true crime stories, hit that like button and subscribe. Now, let's get into today's case. Pastor Leon Trammell was a man of God. For over 3 decades, he stood at the pulpit of one of Houston's most respected churches, delivering sermons that brought people to tears. His words were powerful, his faith seemed unshakable, and his reputation was untouchable. At 55 years old, he was a pillar of wisdom, admired by the congregation, revered by the community, and trusted beyond question. People sought his counsel for their deepest struggles, believing he was a man who lived by the very scriptures he preached. Beside him, Olivia Trammell was the perfect first lady of the church. At 52, she had spent most of her life as the devoted wife of a preacher, standing by his side through every trial. She handled charity events, counseled young women, and made sure the Trammell name remained one of honor. Their marriage wasn't just a union, it was a symbol. The kind of love their congregation aspired to have. Then there was Daniel Trammell. At 28 years old, he was the spitting image of his father, faithful, hardworking, and deeply committed to the church. He idolized Pastor Leon, following in his footsteps, dedicating his life to ministry. His dream was to one day take over the church his father had built. And finally, there was Lacey Trammell. At 26, she was young, beautiful, and deeply devoted to her husband. When she married Daniel, she believed she was stepping into the perfect life, a strong, loving family, a community that embraced her, and a future filled with faith and happiness. From the outside, the Trammells were flawless. A model family. A force of righteousness. But behind closed doors, Pastor Leon was anything but righteous. It started small. A glance that lingered a little too long. A touch that felt too familiar. A comment that was just a little too suggestive. At first, Lacey ignored it. She told herself she was imagining things. That Pastor Leon was just affectionate with family. But deep down, something about the way he looked at her made her skin prickle. And then, it escalated. Late-night prayer meetings. Private conversations that turned personal. A moment too intimate to be accidental. One night, in the dimly lit halls of the church, he kissed her. She should have pulled away. She should have run. But instead, she let it happen. The guilt was instant. The shame unbearable. They swore it was a mistake. That it would never happen again. But it did. They stole moments in the pastor's office, in the back pews of the church long after the congregation had gone home. They found excuses to be alone, seeking each other out like an addiction they couldn't shake. It wasn't just lust. It was danger, it was power, it was the thrill of knowing they were doing something unforgivable. It was supposed to be their last time. They had said it over and over again. They weren't going to do this anymore. They were playing with fire. It had to stop. But the moment they were alone, none of that mattered. Leon's hands found her waist before she could even speak. Lacey's breath hitched as he pulled her close, his lips crashing against hers in a way that made her forget everything, her marriage, his position, the fact that this was the worst mistake of her life. Every time, they swore it would be the last. Every time, they ended up tangled together again, gasping, reckless, consumed by something neither of them could control. It was wrong. It was dangerous. But it was intoxicating. And then, Lacey was late. At first, she brushed it off. Maybe it was stress. Maybe it was nothing. But deep down, a gnawing fear told her otherwise. One night, alone in the bathroom, she stared down at the pregnancy test in her trembling hands. 2 pink lines. Positive. Her breath caught in her throat. The room started spinning. No. No, no, no. She and Daniel hadn't been intimate in weeks. This baby, it was Leon's. She clutched the counter, trying to steady herself. Her stomach twisted with nausea, not just from the pregnancy, but from the sheer horror of what this meant. This wasn't just an affair anymore. This was real. Her hands shook as she picked up her phone. She didn't even think. She just dialed. Leon answered on the second ring. Lacey. His voice was soft, familiar, dripping with the same intensity that always pulled her in. But this time, she wasn't calling for him. She was calling to ruin him. I'm pregnant. Silence. Then, a sharp inhale. Lacey, no. She squeezed her eyes shut. I took a test. Another pause. Then, his voice dropped to a whisper. Are you sure? She could barely get the words out. It's yours. The line went dead silent. Leon felt like the air had been sucked out of his lungs. This couldn't be happening. Not to him. Not now. This was the one thing that could destroy everything. His marriage. His reputation. His church. His entire life. Listen to me, he finally said, voice tight with panic. You have to get rid of it. Lacey's grip tightened on the phone. What? You have to, he hissed. We can't let this happen. If Daniel finds out, if anyone finds out, you want me to get rid of it? Her voice cracked, disbelief washing over her. Lacey, please, he begged. I'm trying to protect you. Protect us. She laughed bitterly, tears burning in her eyes. No, Leon. You're trying to protect yourself. She hung up before he could say another word. For the first time, she realized, Leon wasn't the man she thought he was. And this time, there was no turning back. She wasn't covering for him. She wasn't hiding this. The truth was coming out. And it was only a matter of time before Olivia, his wife, found out. Olivia Trammell wasn't a fool. She had spent over 30 years by Leon's side, watching him preach about love, faith, and righteousness. She had stood in the front pew, smiling up at him as he led their congregation, believing, truly believing, that he was the man God had chosen for her. But something had changed. For months, she had felt it. The stolen glances between Leon and Lacey. The tension in the air when they were in the same room. The way Lacey's laughter was a little too soft, a little too sweet when Leon was around. And Leon? He had been different, too. Distant. Restless. A man carrying a weight he refused to speak of. At first, Olivia had pushed the thoughts away. No. Leon wouldn't. He couldn't. But doubt had already planted its seed. And the more she paid attention, the more cracks she saw in the perfect life they had built. Then, one night, she heard it. She had been walking past Leon's office when she heard his voice, low, urgent, desperate. She stopped, heart pounding. I told you, Lacey. You can't keep it. A pause. Then, Lacey's trembling voice. I'm not getting rid of my baby, Leon. I won't do it. Silence. A silence so heavy, so suffocating, Olivia thought she might collapse under the weight of it. Baby. Lacey. Leon. The air left her lungs. Her hands shook as she gripped the doorframe, bile rising in her throat. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. But it was. And suddenly, every stolen glance, every tense moment, every instinct she had buried, it all made sense. Olivia felt herself moving, felt her feet carrying her into the office, but it was like she wasn't even in her own body. Leon and Lacey both turned, their faces draining of color the second they saw her. Olivia, Leon started, but she held up a shaking hand. Don't, she whispered. Her voice was barely there. Leon opened his mouth again, scrambling for an explanation, a lie, anything. But there was nothing left to say. Tears burned in Olivia's eyes as she turned to Lacey. Her son's wife. A woman she had welcomed into their family, into their church, into their home. How long? Olivia's voice trembled. How long have you been betraying my son? Lacey swallowed hard, her hands cradling her stomach. Olivia's gaze followed the movement. The nausea hit her all over again. She turned back to Leon, something dark and broken twisting inside her. She had loved this man. She had devoted her life to him. And he had repaid her with this. You disgust me, she whispered. Leon took a step forward, panic flashing in his eyes. Olivia, please, just listen, listen to what, she snapped, her voice rising now, raw and ragged with betrayal. You've been sleeping with our son's wife. You got her pregnant. She could barely breathe. She could barely see. Leon reached for her hands, but she ripped them away. I'm telling Daniel, she said, voice shaking. I'm telling everyone. And for the first time, Leon, strong, confident, righteous Leon, looked afraid. Olivia, he pleaded. You can't. I have to. He shook his head frantically. No, you don't. Think about what this will do to our family. To the church. To Daniel. She laughed bitterly, but there was no humor in it. Oh, now you care about Daniel. He stepped closer. Please. She turned away. But then, I'll fix this. His voice was low, urgent. I swear. Just, don't say anything. Not yet. His hands gripped her arms now, tight, desperate. Olivia wanted to rip away from him. She wanted to run to Daniel, to scream the truth from the rooftops, to destroy everything Leon had built, just like he had destroyed her. But then she thought about her son. About what this would do to him. About how it would break him. And for the first time that night, Olivia hesitated. She closed her eyes, inhaled sharply. Then, she exhaled. And nodded. Not because she forgave him. Not because she would ever forgive him. But because Daniel deserved better than to have his life shattered by the truth. At least, for now. But secrets like this never stay buried forever. And when Daniel finally heard the truth, it wouldn't be from Olivia. It would be from Lacey herself. Daniel felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. His mind couldn't wrap around the words that had just left Lacey's mouth. She was pregnant. But the baby wasn't his. It was his father's. Daniel's breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, his entire body trembling with something dark and consuming. Lacey was crying now, begging him to understand. I never meant for this to happen, she sobbed. Daniel, please, but he didn't want to hear another word. His pulse pounded in his ears as he turned and stormed out of the house, his vision blurring with rage. He knew exactly where he was going. His father had always preached about morality, about faith, about righteousness. But the man standing at the pulpit every Sunday was nothing more than a fraud. By the time Daniel reached his parents' house, he was seeing red. He didn't knock. He didn't wait. He kicked the door open. Leon stood in the living room, his face twisting in shock at the sight of his son. But Daniel didn't stop. He lunged. His fist connected with Leon's jaw, sending the older man stumbling back. The sound of bone meeting flesh echoed through the house. "Daniel!" Olivia's panicked voice cut through the chaos as she rushed forward. But Daniel wasn't done. He grabbed his father by the collar, shoving him against the wall. "You bastard," he roared. Leon's lip was split, blood trickling down his chin, but he didn't fight back. Daniel's chest heaved, fury burning in his veins. "How could you?" he choked out. "How could you do this to me? To Mom? To us?" Leon's hands trembled, but his face remained eerily calm. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he said quietly. Daniel's grip tightened. "Don't lie to me," he spat. Olivia pulled at Daniel's arm, trying to pry him away. "Daniel, stop," she pleaded. "Please." Daniel let go, shoving Leon backward with disgust. "You're a disgrace," he seethed. "You're not a man of God. You're not even a man." Leon wiped the blood from his mouth, his gaze unreadable. Then, he straightened his tie. And in that moment, something inside him changed. He saw it now, clear as day. There was no fixing this. No redemption. No way to silence the whispers that would destroy his life. Daniel would never forgive him. Olivia would never look at him the same. And Lacey? She had already cracked. It was only a matter of time before the whole world knew the truth. Leon had spent his entire life building his reputation, his image, his legacy. And he wouldn't let it all burn down because of one mistake. No. If he wanted to survive this, if he wanted to erase the sin, the shame, the scandal, he had to take control. He had to make sure no one lived to tell the story. So, he made the decision. His entire family had to die. Daniel. Olivia. Lacey. The unborn child. If they were all gone, the truth would die with them. And to the outside world, it would be nothing more than a tragic accident. Leon inhaled deeply, straightening his shoulders. A calmness settled over him. Because now, for the first time in weeks, he had a plan. Leon sat alone in his study, the weight of his sins pressing down on him like an unbearable force. His hands trembled as he gripped the armrests of his chair, his mind racing through the only solution left. There was no coming back from this. Olivia knew. Daniel knew. Lacey was cracking under the weight of the secret. If he didn't act now, it would all come crashing down, his reputation, his church, his entire life. He had spent years cultivating the perfect image. The devoted husband. The respected pastor. The man of God. But what would they say when they found out the truth? What would his congregation whisper about him in the pews? He could already hear the murmurs. The shame. The disgust. The ruin. No. That couldn't happen. He wouldn't let it happen. His family had become a liability. A threat to everything he had built. And if he wanted to survive this, they couldn't. He had thought about other ways, an accident, poison, something quick and clean. But nothing seemed foolproof. He needed something final. Something absolute. And then, it came to him. The fire. Fire erased everything. It consumed evidence, swallowed up secrets, left only ashes behind. If the house burned down, there would be no questions. No confessions. No scandal. Just grief. Just loss. A tragic accident that would leave him the grieving husband, the devastated father, the last man standing. It was perfect. And so, he planned. He waited until the house was still, the air heavy with the quiet of sleeping bodies. He moved carefully, methodically. He had studied how fires spread. How quickly smoke could suffocate a person before the flames ever touched them. He started in the living room, near the curtains. Fabric burned fast. Then, the kitchen, grease stains, paper towels, things that would ignite instantly. He worked in silence, pouring gasoline over furniture, across the carpet, down the hallways. The strong, sharp scent filled the house, but no one stirred. He was careful not to step in the puddles, leaving no traces behind. He moved toward the bedrooms, pausing at the doorframes. Daniel was asleep, his back turned, oblivious to the father who had condemned him. Olivia was curled up in bed, her face peaceful, unaware that she would never wake up. Lacey, his mistress, his downfall, lay with one hand resting over her growing stomach, the proof of their sin. Their two small children, innocent, untouched by the corruption of the adults around them, slept soundly in the next room. For a moment, Leon hesitated. Could he do this? Could he really take everything away? But then he thought of the shame, the ruin, the headlines that would destroy him. And the hesitation disappeared. He struck the match. The tiny flame flickered, innocent at first. Then, he dropped it. Whoosh! Fire exploded across the gasoline-soaked floor, racing up the walls, swallowing everything in its path. It moved faster than he expected. Within seconds, thick black smoke curled toward the ceiling, consuming the air. The heat intensified, suffocating, blistering. A cough. A rustle. A shift of movement from one of the rooms. Someone was waking up. Leon didn't stay to find out who. He moved quickly, slipping out the back door, making sure not to inhale too much of the smoke. He needed to appear untouched when the authorities arrived. His car was parked down the street, just as planned. He climbed inside, wiped his hands on a cloth, and drove away, far enough to give himself an alibi, but close enough to watch the glow of the flames in the distance. By the time the fire department arrived, the house was an inferno. The neighbors stood outside in horror, watching as the fire roared, as the structure crumbled in on itself. Screams, distant, desperate, were swallowed by the crackling heat. Olivia. Daniel. Lacey. The children. There was no escape. And when the roof finally collapsed, when the flames consumed the last of the home, there was nothing left but silence. Nothing left but ashes. The fire had done its job. Or so Leon thought. By the time the last ember died, the house was nothing but a smoldering ruin. Charred wood. Collapsed beams. The acrid scent of burnt flesh hanging heavy in the air. The fire department worked tirelessly, sifting through what was left, pulling out bodies that were barely recognizable. The community mourned. The church wept. And Leon stood among them, his face a mask of grief, his hands folded in fake prayer. He played the part perfectly. But fire may destroy, yet it does not erase everything. And the investigators weren't as easily fooled. At first, it seemed like a simple tragedy, an electrical fire sparked in the dead of night, trapping the family inside. It was devastating but not suspicious. Until they looked closer. Traces of gasoline. Everywhere. Seeped into the carpet. Lingering in the scorched remains of the furniture. Streaked across the hallways too evenly, too deliberately. Fires caused by faulty wiring didn't burn like this. And they certainly didn't reek of accelerants. The evidence didn't lie. This wasn't an accident. This was arson. And then, the biggest revelation of all, Lacey's remains. A routine autopsy. Standard procedure. But when the medical examiner opened her up, they found something Leon hadn't considered. A fetus. Small. Undeveloped. But unmistakably human. Lacey had been pregnant. And now the question wasn't just who set the fire. It was why. The investigators dug deeper. Leon was the grieving husband, the heartbroken father, until they started peeling back the layers. His movements that night. His too perfect alibi. The way he had left his car just far enough away to be returning home when the fire was discovered. It was all too clean. Too rehearsed. The truth was bubbling to the surface, unstoppable, undeniable. Leon was called in for questioning. At first, he played the part flawlessly, concerned, confused, cooperative. But the detectives weren't buying it. They pushed. Pressed. Laid the evidence out in front of him. The gasoline. The baby. The motive. And then, Leon cracked. His composure shattered in an instant. The mask of grief fell away, revealing the monster underneath. His voice trembled. His breathing hitched. His hands clenched into fists on the interrogation table. And then, he spoke. His confession was cold. Chilling. Devoid of remorse. He had done what he had to do. He couldn't let them ruin him. They forced his hand. One by one, he admitted to every horrifying detail. The affair. The pregnancy. The plan. The fire. When he finished, the room was silent. The detective stared at him, stunned, not just by what he had done, but by how he justified it. Leon looked up, his eyes dark, empty. And then, he said something that would haunt them forever. They were already dead to me. The courtroom was packed, church members, former friends, people who had once hung on to Leon Trammell's every word now sat in stunned silence, waiting to see him answer for his crimes. The trial was one of the most shocking in Houston's history. A pastor. A father. A husband. Accused of murdering his entire family in cold blood. Leon walked into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, a shadow of the man he once was. No designer suits. No polished shoes. No pulpit to hide behind. Just shackles. The prosecution was ruthless. They laid out the evidence in excruciating detail. The gas residue on his clothes. The inconsistencies in his alibi. The security footage that showed him buying cans of gasoline days before the fire. Leon's defense tried to argue that the fire had been an accident. That he was a grieving man, falsely accused. But there was no coming back from the mountain of proof stacked against him. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. And when they returned, their verdict was swift. Guilty. The sentence? Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Leon Trammell, once a man of God, had become a monster beyond redemption. As he was led away in handcuffs, he kept his head down. No apologies. No remorse. Just a broken man who had lost everything. His church. His legacy. His family. And all for a secret that couldn't stay buried. What do you think? Could anything have stopped Leon before he reached this point? Or was he doomed the moment he gave in to temptation? Let us know in the comments. If you love true crime stories that are dark, disturbing, and unforgettable, you're in the right place. Subscribe to Everyday True Crime, hit the like button, and turn on notifications. We'll see you in the next case.